Morning from Southern California, La Jolla, California, the Institute of the Americas. This is Jeremy Martin, Vice President for Energy and Sustainability, and welcome to our webinar, Leveraging Potential, Latin America and the Caribbean Energy Outlook. Once again, we're delighted to do this on the occasion of Sproule's annual report, their annual Latin American Outlook report assessing the region's energy sector. And we're pleased to be able to do this again and have our friends from Sproule sharing their Outlook report, or at least a condensed version of it. We'll get you a link a little bit later to the full report. We'll organize the webinar today in two halves. So first half will be some formal remarks and interventions by both some representatives from Sproule as well as the Institute of the Americas. We'll have some audience polling. We'll have a couple of different polls that we'll launch during the course of the webinar. I think everyone at this point is familiar with the Zoom webinar functions in terms of Q&A. And don't have to wait until the Q&A section, the second half of the webinar, to jump in. Feel free to post questions at any time during the webinar. And then the chat function. And so I think everyone is probably pretty used to those by now. And as a matter of fact, I want to use the chat function and get off to a little bit of a participatory start here and ask folks to go ahead and post in the chat where you're joining us from today. We always like to know just exactly where in the hemisphere or the world, I guess, you may be joining us from. So if you want to avail yourselves of that, post a hello, good afternoon, good morning from Rio, from Madrid, from Calgary, wherever you may be joining today. That would be a fun way to start this. And as I mentioned, we're pleased to have with us from Sproule two representatives, their Senior Vice President for Corporate Development, Chris Milda, and the Regional Director for Latin America, Jorge Milanese. So good to see you both, as always. Thank you guys for your support as part of the steering committee at the Institute of the Americas. And Chris and Jorge will do the heavy lifting of the formal report presentation. And then we'll turn to Marta Jara. And Marta Jara is going to be a discussant today and offering some reflections, both on the report, but just big picture insights and perspectives. And I'm delighted that Marta can join us again this year for this webinar. Marta's been my colleague officially for almost 4 years, since late 2020. She joined our illustrious roster of non-resident fellows here at the Institute of the Americas, not long after she left government service as CEO of ANCAP in Uruguay. And some of you probably also know Marta from her time at Shell, including as country chair in Mexico. So thank you, Marta, from Montevideo today. So thank you for joining us and offering some comments. And before I formally pass it over to Chris, I want to take a moment to thank Diana Rodriguez, Francesca Carrillo-Diaz, and also Nicole Ronsky at Sproule for their support in preparing this webinar, running this webinar, and all that entails. So thank you all, and welcome everyone. We appreciate your time today, this morning. And we look forward to, of course, your participation, both in the polls, I should say, and also in the Q&A discussion of the webinar. So, Chris, I'm going to hand the mic over to you and let you take it away, please.
Well, thank you, Jeremy, for that introduction. And we are most appreciative of the relationship and partnership we have with the Institute. And Jorge and I are, of course, excited to share some highlights of our report today and also to hear some reflections from Marta, who has a deep view of the region as well. Now, I trust most of you on the call are familiar with Sproule, but just a word on who we are for a bit of context. We are a global energy consulting and advisory firm. And one of our differentiators is that we offer a perspective that's grounded in both technical, commercial, and operational expertise. And really helping provide a complete view of value and risk across the value chain. And that's particularly with respect to M&A advisory, market studies, reservoir analysis, and asset management. We have dedicated teams for geothermal and carbon management as well, and are active globally, including in LATAM, with offices across the Americas, including in Mexico City, and also have a growing European hub in The Hague in the Netherlands. Just a little bit of context around this report. This is the 4th year we're running it, and it provides an overview of activities across LATAM and the Caribbean on a kind of country-by-country basis. And also, it's really focusing in on a few key themes. And I'm going to let Jorge take us through that and some of the highlights by country in a bit. But what you will see today is really just a teaser of the report, which provides a much greater in-depth perspective. And Jorge will present this through really a sustainability lens as the region is embracing the transition, but also discuss the impact of things like critical minerals and LNG, which are also emerging as key parts of the future strategy in many countries in the region. Now, before I let Jorge loose, I just wanted to offer a few other kind of key comments that I think also provide an important backdrop for how we see the strategic posture of the region. Firstly, we have experienced significant disinflation in Latin America over the past year, which has been very consistent with what we've seen in other parts of the world. But growth almost halved in 2023 relative to 2022, except for Guyana, which is obviously an outlier. And it's set to be lower still in 2024. And even though inflation is lower, it was still elevated at just under 4% in 2023 on average, which indicates that a stagflation scenario with lower growth, higher unemployment, and high inflation is really taking root. And you might argue that many countries in the region have a long history of dealing with inflation. Yes, Argentina, we see you, but it is still something that really hurts long-term growth prospects and productivity, and is part of a wider social, fiscal, and growth challenge in the region. Having said that, we talked last year about how the energy transition has arrived in Latin America, and that's something that is getting built on further. I think that needs to be viewed as an opportunity to really reset the strategic vision for the region, because several countries have tremendous potential to play a key role, both in the transition and as also a guarantor of again, future energy security and significant energy exports. In terms of decarbonization, there are 3 countries already that are viewed as carbon negative, Guyana being one of them, even though it's becoming a major oil exporter. Suriname and Panama are the 2 other ones. And on the export side, of course, Brazil and Guyana in particular are continuing to demonstrate their role as major crude exporters, and are 2 of a handful of countries globally that are really showing any meaningful growth in crude supply at a time when global demand is actually continuing to print new highs. Now, when we talk about global markets in the energy space, it's hard to ignore geopolitics. And we've seen, of course, increasing geopolitical fractures that are also starting to spill into the region. On the one hand, you have Mexico, which probably as a country has the strongest potential benefits of any single country to benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, and obviously has natural ties through the USMCA, notwithstanding some of the ongoing disputes, which we're not going to get into here, but big picture, that is a significant opportunity for Mexico. On the other hand, many countries in the region have also benefited from China's Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, about 2/3 of countries in the region have participated, and China remains the largest trading partner for South America. Now, riding 2 horses at the same time is, of course, difficult, but it would be a lot easier if that rider was a stronger regional powerhouse through greater political and economic integration across the region. And that is still an opportunity. Last year, I said that we are seeing greater fragmentation in terms of globalization. And the question, I think, still remains whether that's going to spur greater integration or fragmentation within the region as well. So with that, just as part of offering some opening remarks, I'm going to hand it over to Jorge, who will give us a quick tour by country, and then we'll return to a few key discussion points. Jorge, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that, Chris. You certainly made my job much easier. And with that in mind, we are going to go very quickly through several of the countries in the region, focusing our comments on these 3 dimensions: decarbonization, including critical minerals and hydrogen, natural gas, and LNG. So let me go directly to this slide to start with, because I want to give you also the superpowers that we have with Janus. Janus is the Roman god of transition. If you think that transition is something new, I mean, the Romans even have a god for that. So Janus is normally depicted like what we have here, with two heads, one looking at the future, one looking at the past. And I think that we need the Janus superpower to understand what's going on in Latin America. Let's go directly to Mexico. And 2 or 3 comments on Mexico. First, in terms of decarbonization, the country already has several initiatives in terms of geothermal power, but also solar and wind, although is advancing very slowly on that. But perhaps the biggest thing that we can mention here is that is the main leading importer of natural gas in the region. You see here all the different pipelines that are coming from the US into Mexico. They're importing between 5 to 7 BCF per day, depending on the weather. But not all the gas is staying in Mexico. There are several projects to export that to the Pacific margin and even to the Gulf of Mexico. There is a floating liquefaction unit that is being put to service as we speak. And the other important thing to remember is that the country is part of the trade agreement with Canada and the US. Here we have the Three Amigos summit that happened last year, where they announced altogether what is called the Sonora Plan, where companies will be investing close to 50 billions with the US dollars in projects, many of them focus on decarbonization and hydrogen production. On the mineral strategies front, Mexico already declared in 2022 that lithium is a national resource, and they even created a national lithium company, Lithium MX, that will have to develop and exploit the resource. So that is Mexico. I think it's very important, as Chris already mentioned. Very quickly in Central America and the Caribbean, I wanted to mention that when you talk about LAC, the acronym, I normally think on Latin America and the Caribbean. For the Indians, it means the line of control, of effective control that China has around the world. So India has taken a point, and they're visiting several countries in the region in order to extend the influence of India in the region as well as China. In terms of natural gas, I think that the biggest thing in the region is importing natural gas through regasification facilities, and this is one of the most of the very interconnected regions in terms of power. Because they have a trunk line called CPAC that is joining all the countries in Central America. The other important thing is that in terms of hydrogen, Panama is taking initial steps in order to do bunkering of methanol to all the ships that traverse the Panama Canal. When we go to Trinidad and Tobago, historically, this is a country that has always been a powerhouse in terms of LNG. They have one of the 2 major LNG facilities in the region. The other one is in Peru. But this is almost 15 million tons per annum per year of LNG production. Unfortunately, because of the lack of enough gas, one of the trains has been mothballed since 2020. And this is why Trinidad has made a point of trying to get more gas domestically, but also reaching an agreement with Venezuela. You probably identify this guy here that is celebrating the signature of the agreement between Trinidad in the name of Trinidad. Here is the Ministry of Mines and Energy of Trinidad and Tobago and the Ministry of Energy of Venezuela signing the agreement that finally ended up with the awarding of a license to the consortium of Shell and NGC, the national gas company, to produce gas from the offshore of Venezuela and bringing that to one of the facilities operated by Shell, called Hibiscus, in the offshore of Trinidad, in order to feed natural gas for the petrochemicals that the island is producing, but also for the LNG. Going to Colombia is very interesting because Colombia is politically bound to enhance the decarbonization of the country, which is already very high in terms of power. Colombia is almost 70% renewable, but still there are a lot of things to do. And the president of Colombia organized a summit with all the 8 presidents of the region that share the Amazonian jungle, in order to try to find ways to reduce deforestation in the Amazonian. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that this graph here that probably you see very little in your screen, these are 2 scenarios run by the International Energy Agency. One on the left, what it will happen in Colombia if they continue doing what they are doing, the policies and the plans that they have. So you will see that the level of utilization of hydrocarbons will increase in the next 20, 30 years. While on the right-hand side is what Colombia should be doing in terms of getting to their decarbonization commitments. And as you see, there should be a dramatic decrease in the use of coal, oil, and natural gas. The country is at crossroads, and perhaps having the Janus help here is fundamental in order to understand what Colombia as a country, as an important country in the region, can do. In terms of decarbonization, it's one of the countries that is very advanced, enacting legislation and a hydrogen roadmap to get there to the right-hand side plan in the next years. Venezuela, we already talked about. The most important development is, I believe, the agreement with Trinidad and Tobago. But since the U.S. government enacted in 2023 a release on some of the specifics to allow Venezuela to do more international commerce with other countries, they have been contacting multiple parties, even Mexico. Here is the head of Pemex visiting the Minister of Natural Resources in Venezuela. There has been discussions even to put back into service a very old pipeline running from Venezuela to Colombia in order to send natural gas to Colombia. But as you probably all know, this is underpinning on the renewal of the license by the US government that is contingent to free and open elections in Venezuela that will happen as announced during June. Going to Guyana, you all know Guyana is a powerhouse. It's amazing what the country is achieving. It's already a carbon negative country in the region. And they have their own plans in order to utilize natural gas from the offshore to increase power generation in the country, or even replace power generation run by diesel fuel oil. But one of the important backdrops here is a very significant geopolitical disagreement with Venezuela. Venezuela is restarting a very old border dispute with Guyana, and this map is very revealing because 2/3 of the onshore Guyana is being claimed by Venezuela today, up to the borders of the Essequibo River that is running here on the right-hand side of this brown sector of the map. But not only that, the offshore claim is involving the whole Stabroek block, which is the block that is already producing 600,000 barrels of oil per day and is bound to produce 1.4, 1.7 in the near future. So this is a significant development in the region. And here you see the heads of state, the president of Guyana and the president of Venezuela meeting in St. Kitts and Nevis to try to de-escalate the situation. But you probably remember that Venezuela already went to the polls, and apparently most of the Venezuelans believe that this area is theirs. So we will have to follow this situation very closely. Going to Suriname, this is also another very significant event in the region. Suriname is next to Guyana, in the border with Guyana. They have several discoveries done by Apache and Total. The initial 3 discovery wells that are here, that are in the trend of the Stabroek block, as you see here in the inset, were mostly gas. But the last 2 discoveries to the southeast are oil. And Total already announced that they will be preparing a field development plan and presenting that to the government probably by the end of this year. Actually, you see here in the picture the CEO of Total, Mr. Pouyanné, and the CEO of Statoil, the national oil company, doing the announcement in Suriname last year. Going to Brazil, there are so many things to say on Brazil that it's impossible to just say only 1 or 2, right? But just to put a more lighter comment here, I put this picture here because I never seen congressmen so happy to reduce taxes, okay? And that happened in Brazil. They passed legislation in order to do a tax reform in the country. And that obviously is a very important step. But Brazil today is already producing 4.6, 4.7 million barrels of oil equivalent, of which 3.5, 3.7 is oil, another 162 million is gas. Normally, that gas was being reinjected in the offshore fields, but Brazil already took action in order to bringing the gas onshore. Different pipelines are being built. The first one that is called Route 1, Rota 1 or Rota Uno, is already on the commissioning stage. And so a lot of gas will come to the onshore of Brazil from the offshore. And that is a significant also geopolitical development because Brazil was very heavily importing gas from Bolivia. And that is fanning out, like in Argentina as well. Actually, Argentina is canceling the contract with Bolivia a couple of years before the due date, because as you know, Argentina is, I'm jumping ahead here, but is producing a lot of natural gas from Vaca Muerta. But the other important thing is that Brazil is still relying in LNG, and there are several floating regasification ships that are contributing to the gas needs of Brazil. And in terms of lithium, we always talk about the lithium triangle, but probably it's a quadrangle. I don't know, Jeremy, if that is a very good word in English.
Might be a pentagon by now.
Yeah, maybe. Yes, yeah, absolutely. But Brazil also have lithium, but they have a different kind of lithium. It's called spodumene. It's hard rock, traditional mining of lithium, but it has several advantages over the lithium brine. And so Brazil is taking action on the lithium front as well. And in terms of decarbonization, if you have to remember something about decarbonization or CO2 carbon capture, Brazil is a powerhouse also in Latin America, because Petrobras has been reinjecting CO2 in the offshore operations for quite some time, to a clip of around 40 million tons. And the other country that has experience with CO2 injection or CO2 capture and utilization is Trinidad and Tobago. But Brazil is taking action also on the regulation for CO2. So we are expecting that and combined with a good solar irradiation in the north of Brazil will contribute to the production of hydrogen in several forms. There has been already a number of projects announced in several ports of Brazil that have a direct connection, a line of sight to export hydrogen in the future to Europe. Ecuador, I only want to mention that as a piece of trivia that LNG is circulating in Latin America in different forms. We have the 2 liquefaction facilities that we talk about. There are several regasification facilities. I was checking, we keep track of all of them, and there are more than 60 projects. 30 of them are already working, and there are 30 in different stages. But LNG gets to Ecuador by truck from Panama. And that is something that you don't see every day, right? But it's not that uncommon. Bolivia is using that internally within Bolivia. Peru is using that as well. And Brazil will start a couple of operations tracking LNG to communities that cannot be reached by pipeline. So this is significant because as we all agree, natural gas is a transition fuel. And so the region is living within the constraints and finding some other ways in order to get natural gas and replace other forms of hydrocarbons with that. Peru, the title is very catchy because it's a country that has a lot of potential, but is going through a lot of challenges. The projects normally are delayed in several cases by years because of the whole process that you have to follow to do the community's consultation. And if you've ever gone through that and you never have the experience, I put a picture here of a community consultation in one of the areas where Peru Petro, the national company, is consulting with the local communities if they want to develop natural resources in the area. So this is a very difficult process, and it has been delayed. Significant investments in Peru for a long time. And communities are not always sitting in a place. Sometimes they are taking actions, and you will see here several attacks to pipelines that have been done by communities as a form of demonstration that they don't agree with the development of hydrocarbon resources. Nevertheless, companies are investing in Peru significantly. A private company, Petrotal, is the major oil producer today, and Occidental, through the Anadarko acquisition, they will be doing exploration in the offshore of Peru again. They will be shooting seismic. We talked already a lot about the triangle of lithium, but this is what is happening in Bolivia. Bolivia was for multiple years an exporting country for natural gas, and now they are trying to develop lithium. They have several advantages there, a lot of desalar flats, where they believe they may hold up to 23 million tons of lithium carbonate. And I also put a picture here if you're not very familiar with the process, but the communities get very involved in the government plans of producing lithium. They have to approve that community by community. And like in Mexico, there is also a national lithium company in Bolivia that is looking to develop all these resources. I put Paraguay here because it's interesting. It's a country that they don't produce natural gas, they don't produce crude oil, but they have a lot of hydropower. Actually, it's a major exporting of power in the whole region, mainly to Brazil, some to Argentina. But because of that, and because it's green power, of course, it's renewable, there has been several announcements to produce hydrogen using that hydropower that Paraguay has plentiful. So stay tuned. Let's see if that comes to fruition. But a couple of companies already announced projects there. When we go to Argentina, Chris did a very good introduction of that. The country is pivoting, hopefully for the best. There are a lot of expectation on what it will happen with Argentina, because it's not only a country with a lot of natural resources in the form of oil and natural gas, but also lithium, hydrogen, geothermal. There is a lot to be said about Argentina. In terms of LNG, there are several LNG plants already announced. One significant one by Petronas and YPF, the national oil company in Argentina, but there have been several. And another piece of trivia is another country that exported LNG at one point using a floating liquefaction and a storage unit. Argentina was an exporter. So if you go to the statistics, don't be surprised if you find some LNG exported from Argentina in the past. In terms of lithium, this is also a significant difference, because contrary to what happened in Bolivia and in Chile, in Argentina, private companies can invest in lithium. You can go there, get a concession, a mining concession, and do your production and exporting. And that is actually what is happening. Several international companies are heavily investing in the country in order to ramp up production in lithium and other minerals as well. In terms of decarbonization, another piece of trivia, the first green hydrogen operation in the whole region has been in Argentina. It's a company called Ichico in Patagonia that has been producing hydrogen from wind power and a little bit of solar power, I understand as well, for a long time already. So Argentina obviously has the capability and has a plan, like many other countries in the region, announced the kind of a strategic plan in order to develop the facilities. I'm not going to dwell much on this because we have Marta on board, but Uruguay is already a champion in renewable power. I believe that at some point, more than 90 or 95% of the power generation in Uruguay is renewable, and the country even exported green power to Argentina and to Brazil as well. Big announcements in terms of the offshore exploration. So for the first time, all the blocks that Uruguay put for bid have been signed, and with very important companies. Here you see CEG. If you are not familiar with CEG, it's a company from the UK, but this week, I believe, they announced a joint venture with Chevron. So Chevron will be joining CEG in one of the blocks to do exploration. And there are great expectations because of what they call the geologists call the conjugated margin. There has been several discoveries on the African side of the same type of basin in what is called the Orange Basin. So not only in Uruguay, but in Argentina as well, there might be several good news in the future coming from the offshore. And last but not least, Chile, which is already a powerhouse in terms of lithium with a lot of hydrogen plants. There has been more than 60 projects announced in Chile. And again, if you haven't seen a solar flood, this is a solar flood. This is an actual solar flood in the Atacama region in the north of Chile, where two companies are producing already lithium and exporting lithium. But Chile is set to increase significantly their lithium production. And in going to the hydrogen side, they even have a demonstration plant in the south of the country where they have been running a car powered by green gasoline. And they have been exporting even that green gasoline to Europe in order to do some tests car producers over there. With that, I think that I went over a little bit over the time. So back to you, Chris, for some final comments and remarks. You're mute.
I'm just conscious of time. I may actually just pass it back to Jeremy, because I think we otherwise may run out of time. It's always a risk with these things.
No, but sure, yeah. That's if you want to just make a couple quick comments, because I think you wanted to talk a little bit about hydrogen, and we can maybe use this moment to launch the poll as well, and then invite Marta's commentary.
No, for sure, and I think Jorge, you mentioned, with many of your countries that you went through, that there's continued great excitement around hydrogen. A lot of various national strategies for hydrogen being launched. Mm-hmm. I guess that the challenge, quite frankly, has been, for most infrastructure investors, not just in Latin America, but globally, the number of commercial investable projects, is still quite limited. So I just wondered if you could comment a bit further on where you see the hydrogen economy blossom first in the region, and then we can talk a little bit about the export potential as well, which in my view is tied to really creating that local demand first as a good starting point.
Yeah, no, indeed, and you're totally right, Chris. So hydrogen is kind of the holy grail for several countries because they are looking at the tremendous opportunity of exporting that in several forms to Europe mainly. And actually, Europe has been supporting all these roadmaps, studies, and some pilots as well in order to try to start the whole cycle. But you're totally right. I mean, that for all the projects that have been announced, there are several voices already raising, saying, look, this is not going to be as quickly as we expect, because not only we are trying to develop a whole new industry, but there are several things under which we don't have very quick resolution, like water sources, power generation, transmission lines, exporting facilities. So it's not just production of hydrogen. That is something that has been known by the world for decades already, but producing at the industrial level and in a way in which you can export is a different proposition. So I think that overall, that is a struggle that the region is facing today, and it's not that there is a lack of investment. Money is plentiful and super available, not only from international multilateral organizations, but even from local banks. But putting together a project finance in any industry, not only in hydrogen, requires a lot of steps and checks and balances and studies that it really takes a lot of time. And to be honest, the local markets will be difficult to develop because there is still a great advantage on having natural resources in the region, right? So if you have natural gas available, why would you pay for more expensive hydrogen, right? Even to the point that some countries are looking at producing hydrogen just to export more natural gas, for instance. So there's
power
several
more electric generation with hydrogen, which seems to be
yes.
Well, there's a poll on the screen, and why don't we thank you, Jorge, for that the regional tour, fantastic, and I appreciate your trivia points, a lot of interesting, and we in fact have a question relating back to one of your points we'll come to. But Marta, not just on hydrogen, obviously hydrogen is something that you know particularly well. You're deeply involved with some hydrogen efforts, green hydrogen. But why don't you offer some comments overall, and then we can look at the poll results as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you very much to Sproule. I really enjoy reading this report. It's tremendously rich, and you know, it goes in the high level picture into all these countries and all these different dimensions and technologies. And you know, as an aid to my reflections, I just did for fun a word cloud to see you know, what is really the weight of the themes, because we're talking about transitions, and perceptions get mixed. You know, you get a sense that there's a lot of things happening towards greener energy, but then you have a lot of presence of fossil development. I mean, with Guyana, with Brazil, even with Venezuela, right? So I was surprised, you know, because you still see a big spot about wells, blocks, oil, right? But the biggest thing that stood out, it wasn't hydrogen, it was lithium, right? Lithium has gained a lot of space, and I don't mean that word count means a lot, but it gives you a little bit of the feel of where's the next gold rush, okay? So lithium was, I think, the most increased. I compared it to the 23 report, and it gained a lot of space, and I was surprised it was at the expense of natural gas. The other thing that grew in terms of presence was geothermal, and hydrogen stayed very much the same. And that brings me to the reflection on hydrogen in particular. I'm a practitioner, as you know, and I'm working on a pilot, a very small project. It's 2 megawatt, but it's very mature. I hope it sees FID in the next quarter or so. And the struggle is really to de-risk these projects, right? So the suppliers, they can't offer you sufficient guarantees. They just don't have the history, because as Jorge said, hydrogen has been produced and manipulated for decades, but not really electrolytic hydrogen at scale, right? So I personally wonder how all these very impressive headlines about commercial scale mega projects can see the light before you de-risk at a smaller scale. I think so. I'm quite bullish about the you know, the importance of hydrogen in some of the sectors and hydrogen derivatives, but it will need to happen stage by stage. And maybe the last reflection, also in the interest of time, you know, I enjoyed reading the report also because it looked like the history of my life. I visited Chico, and it's at the Diadema field, was the first shell field in Argentina. That's where I started my career. But also, you know, 20 years ago, I was in Venezuela trying to develop the north of Paria fields. And now I read, you know, what is happening with Dragon. I was in Mexico, as you know. But the reflection I want to bring, apart from the personal anecdotes, is that I think the events in Ukraine, Russia, now Israel, Palestine, I think they have brought to the fore again the geopolitical risks, okay? And if you put this fact, overlaying it with the lead times, yeah, that's why I bring Venezuela from 20 years ago, the lead times all these energy projects have. It's really very difficult to commit to partners, to supply chains in this very turbulent, again, no, we had all this optimism about globalization, and that's very much challenged these days. So I think it's an interesting space, and I think reports and analysis and conversations like these, sponsored by you guys, Sproule and the Institute of the Americas, are help us navigate all this uncertainty. So these are my 2 pennies.
That's wonderful. I wonder, do you have that word cloud? Maybe we could, if you could share that on the screen eventually. No pressure. We can launch the poll results, because I think it'd be a nice way also to segue to a couple of the questions that have come in that are related, I would say, to hydrogen. Okay, so this wasn't intended to be a trick question, but it sort of was. When we were doing the prep call the other day, Jorge asked us all this question, and we all got it wrong, because it's amazing how many, as you see the different answers here, but the real answer is 140. Around 140 is the number. That's the correct answer. So it's quite amazing in terms of back to the headlines, back to the big picture. Just exactly, so only 3 of you, congrats to those 3 who got it right. Most people came in the single digits. I think the other day when we did this exercise, we all guessed in the single digits, maybe low double digits. So thank you for the 2 cynics out there. Too many projects. Okay, maybe stand by. We have another question later. But there are 2 specific audience questions that I'll pose to both you, Jorge and Marta. One is asking about a specific reference you made, Jorge, to the project in Chile with e-fuels, automobile e-fuels, and exports. I don't know if you can see that in the chat. Can you answer that precise question? It's about what there have been exporting e-gas. What are the magnitude of the exports of the green gasoline?
Oh, not much. I believe that they exported 1 cargo of 22,000 liters.
Okay.
So it's a pilot, right?
Pilot.
So it's not significant, but there are several automakers in Europe that they wanted to test it with their engines, and so they did the exporting. But just to show that things are progressing, companies are working on this, but not at the scale that everybody thought. And even the International Energy Agency is warning that in their estimate, only 7% of all the projects that have been announced will come on stream by 2030.
Yeah. And so thank you. And Marta, there's a question about some renewable aviation fuel. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, if you want to make any comments, or if you want to share your word cloud, if you're able to do that as well, just to show us.
I send it to, maybe Diana can help me. I just send it to you and Diana.
Beautiful. Okay, we can come at the end.
What was the question exactly about SAF?
Yeah.
SAF.
So I think SAF is one of the
SAF being sustainable aviation fuel.
Yeah, sure. So we have the development in Chile, which is for gasoline. It's a small pilot project, and there are some projects, but I think it's the matter of scale, right? So if you want to do the green from green hydrogen, then produce the SAF, it's a scale challenge. The good thing about SAF, I think it's one of the first markets where you start to see real demand, right? So there are some companies that already want to buy SAF. Some also on the marine front are starting to buy green fuels. But for the rest, other derivatives like fertilizers and so on, it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, there are airlines already flying 100% SAF in Europe, right?
Exactly.
I think Europe, and this is a good way to plug the Madrid Energy Conference coming up April 9th through 11th that the Institute of the Americas is co-hosting with another firm, IPD Latin America. But you're right. I think Europe is putting a little stronger sticks in place around mandates and some of the efforts. We did last year here at our big conference in La Jolla, if you guys remember, a representative from Volaris, the Mexican discount airline, who is investing in some pilot projects around SAF, but it's certainly become a question of cost. I mean, Jorge, you made this point earlier. These renewable fuels, these alternate fuels, have to at some point reach a level of cost competitiveness with either that or be mandated. Oh, wonderful! There it is. Oh, Marta. All right. Careful what you ask for. There it is. Lovely. So that is a word cloud. So in other words, it gives weight to
the count of words.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, cool. That was something. All right. There's some further questions around hydrogen. Let's wrap up on hydrogen, then we can come to another question. So question around, do any small hydrogen projects exist? Not everything needs to scale to grid. There's that question in the chat. What are main challenges in tech due diligence for hydrogen from renewable energy sources? Maybe Jorge, why don't you comment on those? And I think Marta, you have a specific example that you can personally reference, and of course Chris Milda, if you want to jump in as well. But Jorge, let me go to you first.
Yeah, in terms of small projects that are for the time being pilots, there are several. They are in Colombia, in Brazil, in Uruguay, of course, in Chile, as we mentioned. So as I said, this is something that is very well known, and in some cases, like in Colombia, for instance, they have adapted renewable energy in order to produce hydrogen for refining operations, which has been the normal way of the normal use of hydrogen so far. So yeah, there are several. There are several, but it's a niche. And normally, the hydrogen production is going into a refinery process, or in the case of Uruguay, to test how to produce sustainable aviation fuel with the combination of the CO2 coming from biofuel and the green hydrogen that Uruguay can produce because of the lot of renewable power that they do, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Bart, you want to comment? I know you have a very specific example.
Yeah, I can't talk too much about it at this stage, but basically, I think the main due diligence technical challenges are on the side of the electrolyzer, degradation curves, pressure cycles, how to really you have different technologies and you want to select the most flexible one, but then when it comes to the very rigorous technical due diligence, that flexibility needs to take a lot of parameters into account. And I think technically you can have these discussions, but then when you need to present that to investors, the risks are sometimes, I mean, they're okay for small pilots, I guess. That's why you do the pilots in the first place, right?
Mhm.
But if you are starting to talk about 100 megawatts of electrolyzer, I'd be a little bit more cautious before more data becomes available.
Yeah, and as we discussed before, is putting together a lot of different pieces. And when you're talking about 1 gigawatt of solar plants or windmills, that is even becoming a challenge in Latin America, because communities, they don't want to give up a lot of terrain, a lot of areas for these solar plants, to the extent that already, I think in Chile and in Brazil, they're building some solar plants in dams over the water
Yeah, it's
as
similar to,
a solution.
yeah, I mean, that's, the idea of distributed generation rooftop solar, of course, using sort of, Chris, a question on that, and let me actually, you're the honorary consul in Norway, so, or the honorary Norwegian consul in Calgary. So I've got to ask you this question. Obviously, feel free to comment on hydrogen, but here's from the Q&A. Norway exports oil and keeps the renewable fleet energy. Is the non-extraction use of energy a force to encourage exporting natural gas in South America if the hydrogens are made from renewable energy? So I think the question is about that balance, in Norway seems to be striking a balance of that Jan is kind of more on not geopolitics, but sustainability, right? Between oil production and net zero. So put your Norway hat on, and also anything you want to comment on hydrogen, please.
No, you're quite right. And what has been a very important part of the Norwegian success story, if you may call it that, is that there's been very strong political commitment on both sides of the spectrum, right? To upholding the value and the development of the oil and gas sector, but making sure that the barrels and the molecules produced are the most sustainable anywhere in the world. So, for example, you have electrified a lot of the production facilities that are offshore, but bringing in power from shore, and leveraging the very strong legacy of hydropower that you have in Norway, which also Latin America has. So that has been an advantage. And at the same time, I mean, most of that oil and gas is, of course, exported, and so with respect to how you kind of balance that out is to say, okay, we're going to maximize the value of our oil and gas resources, and then deploy some of the wealth created from that into being very aggressive on the transition, which is why you're seeing, for example, the highest proportion of sale of electric vehicles anywhere in the world in Norway. Last year, it was close to 90% of new cars sold. And so it's actually allowed the country to take a very aggressive view on actually supporting the transition through subsidies and various incentives. And you're seeing this in the commitment to building value chains for CCS, for example, with the Longship project. The battery value chain is being also developed in Norway. So there's been that kind of strong balance of saying, this is a resource we have, we're going to maximize it, but we're also going to make sure it's the most sustainable in the world so that we can actually continue to produce it and have the last barrels and molecules produced of any country in the world because it's the most sustainable, but then also take the wealth of that and redeploy it into how you develop a commitment to the transition. And that's been, as I said, partly a success story because you got that political commitment and broad consensus around that as a vision for the country.
I appreciate the references, the similarities. I think oftentimes, Norway, well, that's Europe, but I think you make an interesting point, given the hydro reliance, the hydro legacy. So thank you for sharing that. And any thoughts before we wrap up? I mean, we'll wrap up on hydrogen as well, but do you want to comment at all on some of these questions around de-risking, around scale, or some commerciality per se?
Well, I think with hydrogen in particular, right? I mean, if you look at where that strategy is probably most mature, at least in terms of its ambition, would be again in Europe. But the reason why that works is, again, you've got strong political commitment to decarbonization.
Right.
So it starts with that. You've got a significant subsidy scheme in place for green hydrogen. You've got a carbon tax or a price on carbon.
Right.
And the other thing is that it's viewed as part of a systems approach to how the energy system is evolving. So you don't have hydrogen without renewables. Hydrogen, in fact, becomes almost a form of storage, right, as part of the development of many of those projects. So again, it's a slightly different approach to thinking about hydrogen for the sake of hydrogen, or viewing hydrogen simply as another resource that you're going to export, which is what I made a point about earlier. I think you really got to think about how hydrogen can play a role locally, because the reality is large scale hydrogen export is still many years away. And so you got to start with what you can do today that you can justify from a commercial perspective, given the confines of what you have as as a framework to support development, but then also maintain that strategic optionality on the future.
Thank you very much, and we'll probably have to leave the comments there. Let's launch the final poll. We've got a couple of minutes. I will wrap up the famous yes or no that each of you will pose this to you as well. First, the audience will get to weigh in. So we've talked a lot about this, and there's just a question came in, David Morris. We'll have to get back to the lithium in Bolivia question. We're not going to have time for that, but wrapping up on our hydrogen sort of polling. Okay, so 140 or so green hydrogen projects on the table being developed. Here's the follow-up to that, the yes or no question. Will all the green hydrogen projects enter commercial operations by 2030? Yes, no. This is always the third alternative. There'll be a new silver bullet by then. I.e. Marta's world cloud will be completely different by 2030. So, all right, reverse order. Chris, you just got done commenting. We'll give you a moment to think. Jorge, what's the answer here? And then we'll see what the audience said.
Well, I think that the key part of the question is all, right? I'm very positive, but I don't believe that all will be there, right? So no.
No. Marta?
Not all.
Okay.
Some of them.
I know the binary of yes, yes or no, but also all or none. Yeah, yeah. These are not supposed to be easy to wrap up. All right, Chris.
Well, look, I mean, if you're forcing me into a La Jolla style binary answer here, it would have to be no.
All right. I like that neither of you chose there will be a new silver bullet by then. All right, let's see what the audience said about this. Check ourselves against the audience. Oh, there's some optimism. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, I think those of you, thank you for sticking around and participating in our final poll. I know we're running out of time, but there remains to be, for all of the points we've discussed, a lot of questions, perhaps more questions still around hydrogen, but also some of the pilot projects and the early results, I think, particularly on the derivatives, and some of the local opportunities for fuels and outputs like fertilizer. And then also I noted that I think it was this week, Shell made a big announcement, I think a partnership around hydrogen, about how they were going to displace their gray hydrogen that, as you mentioned, Jorge, has been part of their operations for decades. And they will eventually move to all of that gray hydrogen, or all of the sort of traditional hydrogen in their processes and industrial processes, with green hydrogen. So I think those are the kinds of things that will certainly be happening. The question that we've all raised about the broader commercial scale, and you know, every country in Latin America wants to be the exporter of choice. So let's see about that. Well, that'll be the 2025 Sproule Outlook report, right? So thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your participation. Thanks for, we had somebody from joining us from Paris. Thanks for joining us late in the day on a Friday from the IEA. And there's some more comments. Thank you. And all over the region and hemisphere. Thank you again, Jorge Milanese, Christopher Milde from Sproule, and my colleague and friend, Marta Hara at the Institute of the Americas, and Diana Rodriguez and Francesca Carrillo. So have a wonderful Friday. We'll download this recording and make it available. And of course, thanks, Francesca. We have the link in the chat for the Sproule report itself.